Welcome to episode 138 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Yeah, we're getting up there, man. Getting up there. 138, going to be the 150 before too long. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie. Producer Johnny Pham is on the road for work this week, so he is unable to be with us. But Dalton, we have a fun show coming this week. We're talking rookies. We're talking a loaded receiver class and one awesome guy and a couple of dudes maybe at tight end, but a lot of fun prospects today. First of all, how are you doing 8 days out from the NFL draft?
I am so excited. You've seen Schefter talk about it. I think all the guys talked about it, but this is probably going to be the most offensive heavy NFL draft in our history, which for fantasy is super exciting. We probably have the three best wide receiver prospects going together at the same time we've had in a long time. And some interesting, there's so many trade up and trade down opportunities that I can't wait to see how the madness unfolds and what, Monty Ossenfort for the Arizona Cardinals does again this year, if he's going to trade down and trade right back in, and just what kind of madness we're going to see with this NFL draft.
I cannot wait for this receiver draft where, like you said, if you need an offensive player and if you need a receiver specifically, this is a great year for that need. I cannot wait to watch the Chiefs not draft a receiver until like the 6th round of this draft and get extremely triggered. But you mentioned those three receivers, and that's where we're going to start this off. I think anybody who's listening probably knows. If you don't, the consensus top three in whatever order: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. I guess first, Dalton, Marvin Harrison, this whole draft process, really since last year, he was the classic, just like Caleb Williams at quarterback. Marvin Harrison was just wait till next year. And, last year's receiver class was not fantastic, but it was this guy would be number one in this class with a bullet. Now that we're actually to Marvin Harrison Jr.'s year, is he number one in your ranks? And how would you rank this top three?
He's not number one in my ranks, which,
wow.
I know that there's like a lot of reactionary Twitter that does that.
Yeah.
For this reason or that reason. I like him a lot. He does everything really, really well. There's nothing in his game that you're going to be able to pick apart consistently and say, like, this guy's not going to excel at the NFL because of X or Y. My problem with him, and it's a similar problem I had 2 years ago with Garrett Wilson, is that he doesn't have like a legitimate X factor trait like I would consider the two following wide receivers in this class to have. He's still going to perfectly end up in the NFL as a clear elite wide receiver one. I just think the ceiling on especially Malik Neighbors is a lot different. We'll talk about him here in a bit. But he struggles a little bit with his hand catching technique, which it's a minor pickup, but a guy like Malik Neighbors isn't doing that. And so that's really where that comes down to. And also, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a poll on Twitter today it asked if Marvin Harrison had Amari Cooper's season total like career breakdown, would he be a disappointment? And almost everybody said yes, which is pretty wild considering that.
But it's true. Because this guy is billed as a generational receiver prospect, and he has the college career to back that up, and he is a gaudy prospect. So like, you expect a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase type of prospect. And if you get Amari Cooper, that is a disappointment. Heck, I even think if you I don't know. I don't want to go too far with this, but if you told me at the time that Amari Cooper came out, or like even during his rookie year, that this was going to be his career, I'd kind of say, it kind of feels like he didn't even get all out of his talent that he could have. And even though it's been a really good career.
Yeah, we have a guy borderline 10,000 yards with 2 seasons where he was injured and like multiple top 15 wide receiver finishes under his belt.
Yeah.
That's my biggest bugaboo right now about Marvin Harrison is like if he comes out and has what 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns this year, people are going to bill him as a bust and be disappointed in the same way that people were disappointed in
With
Bijan.
Bijan. Yep.
And it's just like that. I'm not approaching it with trepidation. I'm just approaching it with a little bit of realism. And yes, he's probably going to be an Arizona Cardinal and land in a great situation. But at the same time, he's going to be the only guy as of now that we know of on that roster who's going to warrant double coverage from NFL corners every single snap. So it's just approaching it with a little bit of realism. I'm already seeing fantasy Twitter getting excited about Jeremiah Smith, the freshman wide receiver at Ohio State, and we're doing it all over again. So it's like, let's just pump the brakes a little bit here. He's probably not going to break any records like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase were going to, because they landed in absolutely stellar situations and are truly like once in a lifetime prospects. Like if he has CeeDee Lamb's rookie wide receiver season, how would you feel?
I'd have to go back and look at CD's stats, but I do know that we had all kind of felt like CD could do more up until this year. He had never really busted out at that elite level. I mean, I'd probably feel fine. But I do agree with you that consensus probably would not feel fine. So I guess real quick, and then I'll give you mine. What is your ranking these top three guys in order? You established that Harrison's not one.
It's Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, Roma Dunze. I agree with Matt Harmon's take that it's kind of a silly exercise. Like you're probably happy with any of these guys, and I'm happy with any of these guys. But
yeah, it is like splitting hairs, and part of it is preference. I think because like you can rank these guys, and I really do think this any order of the three, and I think it's totally defensible. I don't think there is a clear 1, 2, 3 out of this group, even though consensus like that echo chamber has kind of had a very consensus 1, 2, 3 for a while in this group.
And I think inevitably, like post draft, my rankings will solidify a bit based on where these guys end up.
Yeah.
Like if Malik Neighbors is a Giant, he probably drops to 3.
The Giants are listed as a worst fit a couple of times on this list, even though they have like literally nobody on offense. So you said it was Neighbors, Harrison, Roma Dunze. I literally have it exactly flipped. I have Roma Dunze 1, Harrison 2, and Malik Neighbors 3. So that is like the prime example of this is a real eye of the beholder situation. So let's move on and actually talk about these guys a little bit. And, you know, we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown of their skill set. We'll give some best, worst landing spots. I think we have some player comps for each of these guys as well. Let's start with Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, this is a guy, pure X receiver. Nearly 80% of his snaps were out wide. This is in his reception perception sample. That is something I'm going to reference a lot throughout this show. He is awesome against man, zone, press, double coverage, whatever. He's got crazy athleticism. He makes a lot of those highlight catches on the sideline, like kind of reminiscent of a Garrett Wilson, who you mentioned earlier, making some of these flashy plays. And I think, like you said, really the only thing you can point to is some of the inconsistencies with his hands. And then he is not Malik Neighbors after the catch. He is not even Roma Dunze after the catch. I don't think that's a little bit of a difference between him and those other two guys. Like for me, I like the Cardinals. I like the Chargers as landing spots. I don't know what you feel about landing spots. And then worst landing spot, I just put New England because it's hard to come up with a worst landing spot for him. So I just went with like that kind of New England, maybe the Giants, as just a spot where defenses can focus on him and only him and make his life really hard out of the gate.
Yeah, I'm pretty, in step with you on that. Marvin Harrison had back-to-back over 1,200-yard receiving seasons, one of them with a guy named Cal McCord, who will never touch the NFL field. God help us all. And
he is Nebraska's starting quarterback this year.
Yeah, okay, so his career is over because that is where quarterbacks do go to die. But very interesting like ratio of Marvin Harrison because he's bigger than his dad and he's better than his dad, which his dad was obviously an all-time great with Peyton Manning. But the hang-ups to my game with him are, first, it's the hands. The hands, he struggles at the catch point with the ball on occasion. And then secondly, and this is really the confirmation for me on putting Neighbors over him is he doesn't do anything after the catch, which it's not a big deal when you're 2 yards open, and you're going to catch the ball and get a 30-yard gain. But the explosiveness could be limited after the catch, and we're getting really nitpicky on those. Same with you. Worst landing spot for me was New England because it's really the only team I could see getting him before the Cardinals at 4. Giants, consensus top 3 guys all have the worst landing spots. Rome a little more variance because I think he could go a little lower just based on his NFL capital right now. But Giants' worst landing spot here, they're not going to get much done. He's going to face the most double coverage of any wide receiver if he ends up there. And then ideal landing spot, Arizona and the Chargers, of course. Both teams, big holes at wide receiver and above average starters at quarterback who can process and get him the ball where he needs it.
Yeah, and as far as player comps, like one that I have seen, I think maybe it was Waldman made the comp. Like, imagine Mike Williams without the back and knee and neck injuries, and that's kind of what the archetype of player that I think we're looking at here.
Yeah. For me, I went with AJ Green. I know a lot of younger fantasy people have like only negative ideas about AJ Green, but he was a stud for so long. I also think it's a realistic outcome where there are going to be seasons where he only has 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns, and you're a little disappointed. And a lot of that is a result of the quarterback room and play calling that he could be a part of. So high end, I think he could end up as AJ Green, maybe even a little plus. So, multi-season, all-pro contender, like just a guy who is going to be a fantasy stalwart. Low end for me, I went and looked, and I thought if things went as bad as possible, he could end up like Marquise Colston, former Saints wide receiver.
That would be pretty bad.
He had a few top 15 seasons, but a bigger bodied wide receiver who struggles in press situations and is really a ball winner at the catch point, but lacks the ability to continuously get high end separation. So bottom out, worst case scenario for me was Marquise Colston. And I think more than likely he ends up as AJ Green plus.
I've never felt older in my life than when you lectured younger people on not knowing about how good AJ Green is.
I've seen it. There have been people comparing him to AJ Green on Twitter, and there are people in his mentions like he's washed. He wasn't even that good. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, do we not remember prime AJ Green? He was always like into the first round pick in multiple years for fantasy.
Okay, on to another SEC guy, Malik Neighbors. And this is a guy, like, I'll just get the player comp out right off the bat, and I think it'll pretty much illustrate to everybody what archetype of player this is. Like, the Odell Beckham Jr. comps are out there all over the place, and I think just with his skill set, that is very much how I kind of see a best case scenario for him too, even though he is a little bit of a tough evaluation, and Brian Thomas is kind of the same. Because at LSU, it's like these guys were vertical threats, and that is all they did. And I think that says a lot more about the quarterback, and maybe not even the quarterback, just the system they wanted to run and what worked in college than the players. At least in the receivers case, I know a little bit less about how they feel about the quarterback in that, how he fits in that right now. But this is a guy who, in his reception perception sample, less than 20% of his sampled routes were screens, slants, or flats. So he, like, no layups, and he is very good at all of those things, especially slants and digs in the middle of the field. I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the NFL. You think of Odell Beckham housing a slant route. Like, I think you're going to see that type of thing with Malik Neighbors too. He just destroys press man coverage, and that's what makes you think like that. He is a smaller guy who will probably move around, like an Odell, play inside, outside. The fact that he can destroy press man the way that he can is proof enough that he is going to be a legit outside threat despite his size.
Yeah. The reason I had him over Marvin Harrison in my personal rankings is his ability to move inside and outside, which is something I'm sure Marvin Harrison can play big slot. Mm-hmm. I don't think he can play all 3 wide receiver positions as well as Malik Neighbors could, whether it's flanker slot or the X. Interesting tidbit, and this does make both Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors difficult to project. 75% of Jaden Daniels' throws last season were hitches or go routes. Like
Yeah.
they just weren't doing anything else in that offense but running down the field routes. So you didn't get to see a lot of these guys' route tree, but
And that's why it's crazy. Sorry to interrupt, but in his reception perception sample, he broke multiple tackles on 20.5% of his sampled routes, the highest of the last 4 draft classes. And it is harder to break tackles on the deeper stuff down the field than the gimmies, and you make the first guy miss. So it's just a pretty crazy profile.
Yeah, and it's absurd his after the catch ability. My high end comp for him is Jamar Chase, stealing another LSU product from you, in the same sense that like we saw Jamar move inside this year to the slot more because of QB troubles and continued to produce as a high end fantasy starter. Out of the 3, I would probably say Rome's the most quarterback proof out of all these guys, to be completely honest with you. But Malik Neighbors is another guy who I think can work through either bad coaching or bad quarterback play and still generate you some explosive fantasy seasons. And just like with Jamar, I mean, multiple Pro Bowler, more than likely, if not a multiple Pro Bowler, multiple 1,000-yard season guy incoming. If everything goes terrible, my low-end comp for him is another player who like didn't even have a terrible career, but it's Torrey Smith, where he's strictly used as a vertical X receiver in the deep game. He doesn't get moved around. He doesn't get access to motion, and he gets stuck with a quarterback who only uses him in those deep scenarios. Even then, Torrey Smith had 4 top 15 wide receiver seasons. So,
yeah. And like the only thing I can kind of nitpick with him is he had 5 drops. He catches with his body a little bit. 5 drops last year. Catches with his body a little bit. That's really it. Otherwise, I feel great about his game, and I'm not like overly worried about the drops. Like again, these are elite prospects that we're getting to here. I think we'll probably get to more issues with more guys as we go down the road. Like best fits, the Chargers are going to be a best fit for most teams because of quarterback and what the depth chart looks like. The Falcons are one that I like. I really like the pairing of him and Drake London. He can kind of start inside. They can both play inside outside. So I really like that one too. And then I like him going to the Bears and kind of learning from, DJ Moore is another player comp I kind of kicked around for him a little bit. So playing with DJ Moore, I think that would be good for his development too.
Yeah. High end for me was again Los Angeles Chargers, just like you. Low end, horrible landing spot again. New York Giants.
I also had the Titans on here too as a bad landing spot.
Yes, and this is a guy who could go a little later. Other concern for me, I put the Patriots on here too because there is a lot of at least smoke right now that he is the number 1 wide receiver over Marvin Harrison on some people's boards. And if that's the case and the Patriots do it, and then the final bad landing spot I had was the New York Jets. If he falls to 10, first because
he and Garrett Wilson are very similar.
They are.
Yeah.
It's 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, and with him in Rome, I'm going to have trouble for any rookie wide receiver that ends up there because Aaron Rodgers has a very long history of not using his rookie wide receivers, regardless of talent and skill. It's a reoccurring theme, and his buddy Alan Lazard is still on that roster. And God forbid that
is Randall Cobb still there?
If he is, I would not be surprised, which is unfortunate. So that is the other concern if he lands in New York, who I think I'm going to probably be a little pessimistic on all offseason with a 40-year-old quarterback returning on an Achilles injury and 2 33-year-old tackles.
All right, next guy, Rome Odunze, my number 1. I think a lot of people's number 3s, but again, although I've seen him as number 2 in some cases too. He and Neighbors seem to flip a little bit more than he and Marvin in the public sphere. It should not be a surprise to anybody that the guy that was billed big Chris Olave really early in the draft process appeals to me. And like when I saw that back in January, when Dynasty people were starting the post stuff early, I scoffed at that. I was like, yeah, okay, whatever, big Chris Olave. As we've gone on, as I've learned a lot more about these players, read draft guides, watched video breakdowns, whatever, it's like, okay, I think I actually see that. He doesn't have the jaw-dropping highlight high point catches that Marvin Harrison Jr. has. He pops off the screen, but not like Malik Neighbors from an athletic standpoint. But my God, could this man run a route? I actually think he is the safest of all three of these guys. If you were to ask me which of these three guys is the most surefire NFL star, like Pro Bowl caliber, or even all pro caliber guy, I'd say Rome has the highest probability. Maybe not the highest ceiling, but the highest probability and pretty comparable ceiling in my mind. Like his reception perception profile is just unbelievable. If anybody pays for the site,
he's the only all grade rookie.
Yeah, I mean, Harmon gives him comps of Brandon Ayuk and Devontae Adams, and so I'm going to stick with those. I like the big Chris Olave as well. Unbelievable ball tracker. Like, think back to those Washington games. You see Penix throw a lot of the deep passes, and that receiver who was tracking those down, that is a lot of times Rome Odunze. Like, great footwork, physical before and after the catch. He's got average change of direction, but good short area explosiveness. Like a lot of the knocks on him remind me a little bit of the Chris Olave knocks too, kind of coming out, except for the after the catch stuff. He's a little bit better than Olave, but I just love the player. And the Ayuk comp, if he could find his way into a Shanahan style offense, because he is fantastic at the in breaking routes, can get open underneath, also has that vertical pop, like can get open all three levels. He would be an unreal fit for that type of offense. And he is a guy that I'm actually not afraid of sending to New York and kind of throwing into the fire right away, because I think he's that pro ready.
Yeah, and out of all three of these top three guys, I think he showcases the best late hands, where he knows where the ball's coming in from, but he doesn't show the cornerback. He knows it's coming till the ball's already there, and really works the corners the best in that manner. High-end comp for me is Devontae Adams, and like his low-end outcome for me is Jacoby Myers, a guy who every offseason we talk about how great of a route runner is, and how great of a wide receiver he is, and it just seems like his quarterbacks and his coaching staffs can't get it together. But we still know he's a really consistently good player. My scary landing spots are if he falls out of the top 10, and I have Denver and the Raiders here as my two scariest landing spots. One, because the Denver situation just in general is not good for anybody, and the Raiders situation would be him competing against two very similar skill sets.
Yeah, and with a bad quarterback.
I agree with you, though, that unlike the other two, the Giants scare me less in this situation. The other scenario I would like him landing up in would be the Bears.
I think everybody mocks him to the Bears because they just want that to happen.
And I think he would be a great Keenan Allen like understudy. Of like a prolific route runner who I'm not saying he lacks like explosiveness or speed, but Keenan Allen is somebody who's 33 years old and lacks those now, and still continuously gets open with his route running, and that could really elevate Odunze's game to like wide receiver one consistently because of what Keenan Allen could teach him.
Yeah, so we've spent 20 minutes on these guys. I think that's appropriate. Real quick before we move off of them, my personal opinion is I look back at the last 3 draft classes, and Jamar Chase is the only receiver I'm taking ahead of any of these guys as prospects. Do you agree with that take, or do you disagree with that take?
Is Justin Jefferson 4 out?
Jefferson is 1 more out, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I probably agree. I agree with that. Pretty standard, yeah.
So that just gives everyone an idea of truly like what level of prospect we're talking about. Like that puts him ahead of guys like Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Drake London. Like this is a Devontae Smith. These are 3 real dudes coming out of college.
Yeah, I got some breaking news for you, Evan.
Oh God,
J.K. Dobbins has signed with the Los Angeles Chargers.
Oh, I wanted to be the Chiefs. That's pretty good. That's not bad for fantasy though. Him and Gus Bus in the backfield again.
I know, with Greg Roman as the OC again. So we're just running back the 2019 Baltimore Ravens in Los Angeles this time. A pretty good landing spot for him. We'll see if the Chargers take a running back to the draft now, but that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, all the smoke is that he looks good. Obviously, I'll believe it when I see it. Believe it when I see it that he actually can stay on the field. But everybody knows there's been no bigger J.K. Dobbins believer than me. So I hope it works out for him. The spot could be a very good one if he stays healthy. And if they draft a running back and J.K. Dobbins is 85% of the old J.K. Dobbins, it'll be at the expense of Gus Edwards more than J.K. Dobbins, if so.
Yep. I agree. Just wanted to get that out there while we were live.
That's exciting. Breaking news on the pod. All right, number 4 on this consensus list. To be clear, I should have said this at the beginning. Obviously, we know at the top 3, we had different ranks. The rest of these are not our ranks. These are Fantasy Pros consensus ranks. We have to be a little hush-hush with the ranks because of, Dynasty League purposes. But number 4 on the Fantasy Pros list is Brian Thomas Jr. And this is a guy who's another pure X, I think, boundary receiver. He can play inside more than a couple of the guys maybe we'll get to before we get out of here. But he's really good against press coverage. And what is really interesting about him, I thought from Harbin's reception perception sample, is about 2/3 of his charted routes were slants, curls, and 9 routes. DK Metcalf, anybody? Like, that's exactly the DK Metcalf plan coming out of college. So, number 1, I do not want to see him in Seattle. That would be terrible overlap. And number 2, I think that shows you kind of how far we've come in receiver evaluating and discourse, that he's not being pushed down to the second round like DK was, because he is a very similar type of player.
Yeah, and he's a really exciting player. JJ Zacharyson had his high-end comp for him as Quentin Johnston, but what
Excuse me? His high-end comp?
Yes. But it's because it's what Quentin Johnston was, what people thought he was last offseason, as in a deep vertical threat who catches the ball in contested catch situations and has good hands. All things that Quentin Johnston did not, in fact, have. But a lot of people would have told you otherwise until the tape hit the room for those NFL plays.
So the 2 other comps I have are from experts here. Faster T. Higgins and better Christian Watson, like actualized Christian Watson. Also, like shades of AJ Green a little bit here with the type of player.
So my comparisons were Will Fuller, but healthy.
Oh, come on, man. Don't do that to Brian Thomas.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Although I will say,
coming from me, that's a good comparison.
I was shocked. The next guy on the list, I wanted to compare the Will Fuller. I did a little looking. Dalton, Will Fuller was pretty good against press coverage, and the next guy is not. So I could not in good conscience do that. So Brian Thomas Jr. is good against press coverage. So it's not like completely unfounded, but I still like Brian Thomas a good bit more.
Well, and this got overshadowed a bit, but Brian Thomas also ran a 4.33 at 220. Like, Xavier Worthy running a 4.22 at 165 is not as impressive as running it, 60 pounds heavier. Yeah. And his career contested catch rate, he had it all the way up to 53.8% and averaged 13.9 yards per target. And then obviously he led the NCAAs in touchdowns last season. He is an explosive athlete. He needs more work in his route running, which is why he's not close to the consensus top 3. My low end comparison for him, somebody who I didn't know was fast, because it doesn't show up in their NFL playing, is Dante Moncrief. Did you know Dante Moncrief ran a 4.38?
I had no idea. No, you could have told me he ran a 4.58. I would have believed you.
Yeah. But a big bodied, fast wide receiver who people got excited about and never produced. Brian Thomas, out of a lot of these wide receivers, I think has the most extreme outcome potentials. He just simply, like, if he gets stuck in a landing spot that is not willing to let him develop, he could really quickly become a flame out in the NFL. some of the good landing spots I had for him. I like him as a Jacksonville Jaguar where he can fill a bigger X role and do what Calvin Ridley did last year.
I thought about that. Is Gabe Davis is there, right?
Yeah, he's better than Gabe Davis.
He is, but I just don't love that overlap of skill.
Well, and my worst landing spot would be the Steelers at 20. I think that would be terrible. I think him and George Pickens have very similar skill sets. And I also think that quarterback wise, it's just not a good look for him to end up there. The other team that would be kind of exciting is the Colts at 15. It would give him the opportunity to develop because Michael Pittman runs enough of the intermediate underneath stuff. And then you have a giant arm in Anthony Richardson who might be able to deliver to him what we were expecting from Alec Pierce last year, but a guy who wasn't separating consistently enough deep. And Brian Thomas can certainly do that. And then I just think Shane Steichen is a mastermind with these offenses.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Bills is like the spot that everybody kind of wants, I feel like, and they don't really have. I'd have to look back. Who's playing outside for them? Like, is Shakir able to play outside?
It'd be Shakir. Justin Shorter would be another name on that list. They don't have a true outside receiver. I know Matt Harmon will probably tell us that Curtis Samuel could do it if he needed to. They don't have a true outside. They have a lot of gadgety guys who can fill the flanker slot roles.
Yeah, sounds like the Chiefs. The Saints are another one where I like the combination of he and Olave because they don't really have a proven second guy right now. Olave can do enough different things to where I think the two would mesh very well, and it would also give Brian Thomas the chance to kind of ease into Brian Thomas to ease into the NFL as an outside receiver and figure out the other stuff as he goes. And then Carolina, because they were the worst team in the NFL at getting open deep, at converting deep balls last year, and Brian Thomas can do that. So I like that fit as well. I had Carolina as a good fit for a shocking amount of guys. We'll get to that.
Brian Thomas is at 17.5 right now with his over under for the draft. So Carolina would have to get up into there to really do that unless
they have shown to be desperate before, my friend. All right. Number 5 on this list is Troy Franklin Jr. For my money, this is one of the toughest guys to evaluate and talk about. There is not a lot of in between with him. It's either people really love him or people are completely out on him. He's a pretty good route runner who's a pretty good deep threat, but he doesn't have elite speed, but he's still a really good deep threat. He's small, does not play physical. If he were bigger and played more physical, I think people would be a lot more certain about him. But runs a good deep out, like solid player. There are definite holes and definite strengths where you can kind of talk yourself into it either way with him, I think.
Yeah, my problem evaluating him as well as Bo Nix and Bucky Irving is this reminds me of Tennessee and way back when Corey Coleman went 4 overall Baylor, that they have these college Mickey Mouse offenses where like they don't translate well to the NFL. To give you an idea of what I mean by that, last year, 34% of Bo Nix's throws were behind the line of scrimmage, and his air yards per attempt was 6.25, which was 120th in FBS. Like, it was a very short screen game, like weird motion and getting guys open because they're running like behind 2 wide receivers off the line of scrimmage, which makes evaluating a player like this difficult. I know.
I will say, I'll make you feel a little bit better. This is, in his reception perception sample, so it's not the whole season. But if you just look at his route percentage, screens were only 4.8% and flats were only 0.9%. So he was working curls, slants, digs, corners, posts, nines. Like that was his route tree. So he is at least running more of the big boy stuff in this offense.
That's good to know. My other problem is he's 6'3" and 180 pounds.
Yes, he's very skinny.
He's a small boy for being a taller player. And he didn't blow us away with his speed. I think he ran a 4.39. It's funny I say that.
So,
But
but the thing about him is he at least has like apparently elite change of direction. So that's where he's able to kind of make up for not running a 4.25.
yeah. So I don't hate the player. He's probably a second round pick in the NFL draft. My high end comp for him is T.Y. Hilton. I personally don't know if he reaches that. I liked my middle comp better, which was John Brown. Uh, kind of a in-betweener player who does play outside on occasion, but also can play the flanker role. Because of that, I feel like his landing spot is a little shakier. One of the teams I liked was the Bengals in the second round. Him coming in and filling the Tyler Boyd role and working with Jamar Chase in the future if T. Higgins leaves. Other than that, the Panthers are my next one where he could work alongside Deontay Johnson and kind of get himself some good looks. And then last,
Panthers were my best bet.
I really liked the Lions. Like, I think he could fill the Josh Reynolds role well, which was a productive role last offseason, and it gives him time to grow into the NFL because I think he's still missing some stuff. Terrible situations to land in. The Cowboys were one of my big picks here. I don't think he would do well in the Cowboys offense, looking at how they utilized Brandon Cooks last year.
Yeah, I have the Patriots for a bad fit here. And the thing with him is, as I'm pulling his profile back up, he can get open against zone quite well. Against press coverage, not well at all. To me, he reminds me of like a Hollywood Brown, where it's like he can be a deep threat. You want to get him off the line. You want to avoid getting him eaten up in press coverage as much as possible. But he is going to be a useful receiver at the next level, I think.
Yeah, I think useful is a good term. I probably sound a little like antagonistic to him, but it's because a large portion of Dynasty Analytics Twitter has like heralded him in as the consensus wide receiver 4 because he has a young breakout age. He has a lot of yards at a young age, and he's like 20.9 years old, which are all things they love. But my concern comes a bit, again, in a Mickey Mouse-esque offense that Oregon ran. We'll talk about him next week, I'm sure. But like Bucky Irving is another player I cannot get my head around. His college stats look great. The player himself, not the greatest. Yeah. I would feel comfortable with like Troy Franklin lower in my top 10 than where he's at right now.
Yeah, for sure. I'd have some of these up next guys above him in my personal ranks. Next guy up here is Xavier Worthy. And boy, this is a guy that I cannot get a handle on his real life draft stock. After the combine, this guy's up at the Saints at like 15 overall. Today I see him get mocked to the Saints at 45 overall. It's like okay, I can't figure that one out. I mean, the good, obviously, he is so freaking fast. A 4.21 or whatever it was at the combine. He's a good route runner. He can play bigger than his size, not just straight line fast. Like you think of guys like a McCole Hardman, who is straight line fast, but doesn't have the short area burst to really get separation on a variety of different routes. Where it's like McCole, you got to get him on post, deep shots, or like the over routes. Worthy can do more than that. He's more than just a gadget guy. Despite the size, I do think if I had to guess, he will weigh in bigger than 165 when he plays next year. I think he probably dropped weight to run faster at the combine. But a lot like Franklin, he does struggle against press coverage, and that sets him apart from another tiny guy last year in like Tank Dell, who was really good against press coverage. He can fight the ball a little bit on catches. I know that Deshaun Jackson comp is like a rite of passage for a very tiny and very fast receiver who we think is better than a gadget guy. So that's kind of one I've seen going around that I like, and I think I'm probably sticking with, to be honest.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about Worthy. I do agree with you. I think he'll probably weigh in close to like 175, 178. But I mean, he ran a 4.22 and then ran again because he wanted to like go faster.
And then
like,
ran a 4.21.
Like he wanted to beat the record and beat it cleanly and soundly. Going back, he has the best breakout score from JJ Zachariason of anyone, and that's because his rookie year or his freshman year at Texas, he blew it up. It seems.
I mean, he had like 400 yards against Kansas that year, so
Yeah.
and we actually beat them that game. So he like his breakout score is probably set just from that game alone.
It seems pretty consensus to me that nobody likes watching either of the Texas receivers because Quinn Ewers is bad and it's not fun.
And their system is bad. And we've got this whole thing we'll get to next year with next player, I'm sure, with AD Mitchell, where it's like he quit on routes. I don't know. Like, yeah.
It sounds like Steve Sarkisian's offense isn't the best. My high end comp for him, I tried to go away from the Deshaun Jackson just because I wanted to be a little different.
Yeah.
I did Tyler Lockett, where he's a player who gets to good separation at all levels. And then my low end comp for him was DJ Chark, because he could easily get pigeonholed into an X role. He could, if he is a player who gets injured and does not come back from the injury well without explosiveness, he could very quickly not be a productive NFL wide receiver. He does have better route running than DJ Chark right now, I would say. But
he's got a family. He's relocated. I'm starting to add personal details to this.
Had it ready the second time.
My ideal landing spot, and I heard this on Harmon's podcast today, I didn't know that, who just dropped their first mock draft? Peter Schrager. Peter Schrager do a podcast with Sean McVay, and I guess Peter Schrager said if they don't trade back, they're 100% taking an offensive player. Obviously, that could be a tackle for the Rams, but if Xavier Worthy went to the Rams, I would be incredibly excited.
Just think of like Tutu Atwell, but better.
Yes. And it's a good developmental like setup for him. He gets to work underneath Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. I'm sure there are people who'd be disappointed because he'll have like 100 target season maybe, but it's just such a good fit for him. Another one, like obviously Miami has a problem with drafting fast players. Miami would be really cool.
Well, the obvious one is the Chiefs because he can't do all the Tyreek Hill things, but he can do more of the Tyreek Hill like horizontal stuff than McCole Hardman and Kadarius Toney, and the list goes on.
Yeah, some of my nightmare scenarios, the Bills. There's so much overlap between.
I agree. I had the Bills as a bad fit
because
it scares me that they don't have an X. It's like, okay, can we turn this guy into an X receiver because he can be an outside deep threat? It's like he can't beat press coverage right now. So I that's exactly what my thought process was.
It would be terrible. The Broncos were another team I do not want to see him end up on because they don't have a quarterback. And then lastly, I put the Patriots on here, which seems to be a consistent theme. But
they're good. They're gonna take somebody.
They're gonna draft a receiver, and he's gonna fall in your rookie draft. And I'm looking at you right now, whoever you are listening to this. I don't care what round it is. Don't do it. Just don't. Look yourself in the eyes and say, "Do I want to do this to myself?"
The other good fit that I had for him is the Cowboys. I think the Cowboys would be an entertaining fit next to CeeDee Lamb.
I agree. And it's Jerry Jones. It's Texas.
Yeah.
That would be a Jerry Jones move to draft him.
Yep, 100%. All right, next guy, Ladd McConkey. Worked a lot as a flanker in college. It's interesting. He played outside quite a bit too, but does not profile as an outside receiver in the NFL at all. So he'll be an interesting one to follow. You want to get? I don't think I've sent this to you. You want to guess his percentile success rate against press coverage in reception perception?
What was it? I can't imagine he got pressed that much.
Well, he played outside some. Remember that.
That's true.
28th percentile. He was 8% success rate against press coverage, but he's really good against man and zone. He is really good at this is going to sound cliche because, the wide receiver, let's call him smart. But he knows how to work with his quarterback. He knows how to work zone coverages and be a QB-friendly type of receiver. Like, he's a guy that, outside of kind of wanting somebody who can beat press coverage, I think would be really good for the Chiefs because he would, I think, learn how to work really well with Mahomes extending plays and be one of those right place, right time type of guys pretty frequently for him. The big thing for him is going to be, can he get better against press coverage? Because he is really good in other aspects, getting open against man, against zone, really good after the catch, like explosive player, physical player after the catch. It's just he is not a big guy, so he can get eaten up by outside cornerbacks.
Yeah. Interesting thing about him is he was 6th highest in the entire class in yards per route run at 3.26. Out of, I would say, this entire top 10, and I'm not a big injury guy, this Lad McConkey profiles is the biggest concern with injury. He had multiple injuries at Georgia spanning multiple years, which is just always a concerning profile. He's also a little older than some of these guys. The only wide receiver we'll talk about that played at Georgia who had 1,000 yards, Adonai Mitchell didn't. We won't talk about him. Jermaine Burton didn't. Like, he did do something that hadn't been done in a long time, which is 1,000-yard wide receiver at Georgia. For me, I profiled him high end as Emmanuel Sanders, like a tweener flanker player who can get open for you and also do deep work. My mid-tier comparison.
Tyler Lockett is mine. So, like, we're kind of in the same ballpark.
We're in the same one. My mid-tier, and it's not because he's white, but Eric Decker. I think him and Eric Decker also profile really well, where, like, he could have 2, maybe 3 seasons where you're excited. And then my bottom tier, I had Ruben Randall, who was a player who they thought could play all 3 positions, and it ended up he couldn't play any positions. And I think that Lad McConkey could do that, which is also why I think some of his worst fits would be a team like Carolina that can't figure out where to put him, and he ends up in this, like, bad spot where he isn't developing any of his NFL skills.
Can we get him to the Bengals? Like, I think the Bengals is the best fit.
Would be electric.
Because they're a team that I don't think Tyler Boyd's going back. T. Higgins, who knows how much longer he's there? Is it before the season he gets traded? Is it he plays the franchise tag? Does he get an extension? Regardless, I think you could use another receiver there. And, I mean, he does not have to play outside with Ja'Marr Chase if you don't want him to. So I like that fit.
My sneaky fit I like is the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why. I'll expand on this in the offseason. Mark Andrews came back from that injury and kind of sucked. He might be getting up there where he's not the same player and they need somebody in the middle. Rashad Bateman probably is not coming back after his 5th year. I'd be surprised if they re-signed him with the way his tenure has gone there. Still like him as a player. And Lad McConkey and Zay Flowers fit really well together.
Yeah.
And they could get some really fun motion stuff going on because both those guys can play slot and outside. And
Zay is kind of like, I talked about Olave earlier with, I don't remember, with Brian Thomas. It's like Zay Flowers can do a lot of different things. He's not like elite at all of them, but he can do a lot of different things to where a lot of different receiver types can fit with him.
I will say he's consistently mocked to the Chiefs, and I don't know how to feel about it.
I think it'd be a good fit.
All right. Who's next?
Okay. Adonai Mitchell is next. You mentioned Georgia receiver, then went to Texas. The biggest question with him, well, a couple questions apparently. Does his type 1 diabetes make him cranky? That was in the news cycle today. And is he lazy? He is getting the brunt of the criticism for the half-hearted routes, but I've seen other people say it's only fair to look at the rest of the receivers too and just say that seems to kind of be part of the Texas offense. We're running plays where, you're half of the field, you are not getting looked at. Like, you are just there to take up space, and that is the play. And it's hard to kind of know how to parse that out. But what I do know about this guy is he has high-end traits, even though he can be a little bit inconsistent. 84th percentile against man coverage in reception perception, 83rd percentile against press man coverage. Doesn't really know how to get open against zone consistently yet, but I think that is easier to learn than getting open against man-to-man coverage. So I'd prefer that profile. I think for especially, like, he's an X receiver, he's going to be an outside guy. Shades of George Pickens a little bit, and kind of the type of player he is, a little bit inconsistent. He only has 1 drop over the last 2 years, which you like. I I'm sure he doesn't rate highly in a lot of the models because his production profile, as you mentioned, is not good. But I think you can easily point to a gimmicky offense with inconsistent quarterback play and partially explain that away. And then you also look at his usage. His A dot was 17.5 yards. His A dot being that in a gimmicky offense with a subpar quarterback, he's also not a yak guy. Like, I just think there's more to the player than the production would lead you to believe here.
Him and Keon Coleman are the hardest guys to make a case for. You can make a case for and against them pretty easily.
Yeah.
I'm stealing this from JJ Zacharyson, who he has him as wide receiver 7. So like pretty in line with where I think a lot of people have him, kind of in the middle. He, since 2011, wide receivers with a breakout score below 60 taken in the first round are Cordell Patterson, Tavon Austin, Kelvin Benjamin, Kevin White, Philip Dorsett, Josh Doxson, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Reagor, and Kadarius Toney. A.D. Mitchell's breakout score is 41.8, which that doesn't look good. And then you add to that with wide receivers with sub 70 fantasy point scores. Since 2011, Zay Flowers is the only hit. And again, in this draft class, A.D. Mitchell also hits that mark. So that's the negative, is like there are these glaring red flags in his profile. Then like just watch him play against Georgia and the touchdown he gets. Like, it is absurd what he does. The guy fits every athletic checkbox you want. And it is a very difficult thing because Harmon says this, and I largely agree with it, watching just clips on Twitter of Texas. Xavier Worthy also takes plays off.
Yeah.
And the Steve Sarkisian offense it's just like, it's very Mickey Mouse-esque as well.
Well, when you run the RPOs, there's only, like, for some RPOs, when you've got the line moving down the field, there's only one spot the ball can go. Otherwise, it's a penalty if you don't run the ball. So, that I think is the really crux of the issue there.
Yeah. And I know the diabetic stuff like came up on Twitter today. Like, can we not with that
get him to Kansas City, let Noah Gray teach this man how to use insulin and watch him thrive, because the scheme fit and just the fit, like what the Chiefs need, can beat man coverage, outside guide, deep threat, good hand, like better DJ Chark, better Marquez Valdez-Scantling, like he has the tools to be a really good deep threat pretty early. And then how good he can be depends on how he develops the rest of his game.
Yeah, you know what is really good to help you manage your diabetes? Being a millionaire.
Yeah.
My high-end comp for him, and I know this one's wild considering it, is Anquan Bolden. Like, I truly think that he's a player with the talent to be incredibly special. Maybe he needs a good coaching staff to like get him there. That's why on the backside of this, my low-end comparison for him is Jordan Matthews, RIP.
Do you want to know who Matt Harmon says if he squints, he can see glimpses of a certain prime or a certain receiver in his prime?
Who is it?
DeAndre Hopkins. So there are outlandish high-end comps for this guy.
And that's why for me, I didn't give specific landing spots. I need him to land somewhere with a good quarterback and a good offense.
Because I said bad landing spots, any team with a quarterback you can't trust to throw outside the boundaries unless it's schemed up. Like Giants, Browns, Raiders, Broncos, like get all those teams out of my face for A.D. Mitchell, please.
Yeah. And if he lands,
like put the Browns in there.
If he lands in the Bills, if he lands with the Chiefs, if he lands with the Bengals, all of those teams have a good environment to coach this player up. If he lands with the Steelers, him and George Pickens are going to get arrested. I'm just going to put that one out there now. But yeah, really polarizing player, really has everything there on film. Statistically, it's not there. I just encourage you to watch some of the routes he did try on where Quinn Ewers threw it 20 yards over his head. Like
yeah, there's one of his highlights. It's like, I think it's oh God, I'm trying to remember what, but I think it was like an out route where he just completely burns a guy. Oh, it was like a sluggo route. That's what it was. He like burns a guy on a sluggo route, and the ball just like he would have walked in the end zone. That ball goes 10 feet over his head.
The last thing I'll say, because I think this is important, I don't remember who put it. I think it's Ben Greenfield on Twitter. I'll look it up and retweet it after this for anybody interested. In the game where he scored the touchdown against Georgia, there are 3 plays before that. The first play, he runs downfield 30 yards and he's clearly not involved in the play. The second one, he does a very lazy out route, which is what a lot of people have problems with him. And then when they're in the red zone, he runs the same out route, and the cornerback thinks he's taking the play off, and he ends up with that spectacular catch. So there is a full body of work here that you really have to consider with the player and what the offense was doing. And the likelihood that they were setting up that play with the lazy out route is highly likely with what they were doing in Texas.
Yeah. All right. On to another guy who, I mean, you want to talk about polarizing. That is Keon Coleman at number 9 on this list out of Florida State. This is a basketball player, and it shows up in the way he plays football. He is a contested catch monster who cannot separate. He does know how to play against zone, cannot separate against man, played outside in college, has to be a big slot in the NFL, I think, to have success. Every catch he made almost was a contested catch, it felt like, this year, and he didn't have a drop until the ACC championship game. So that tells you how good this guy's hands are, how good he is at what, like 50-50 balls are 95-5 balls for this guy. But he is just almost like an Alshon Jeffrey type of guy where it's like the stats are there. It just doesn't it's a little hard on the eyes sometimes because there's always a defender right there. But the highlights can be really great when he makes those great plays. Apparently was committed to KU at one point. Learned that yesterday when I was doing some research on him. Went to Michigan State. Played very sparingly for their basketball team, by the way. Scored in a Big Ten game. Transferred to Florida State. Was really good last year. And this is like a Courtland Sutton, is kind of what I want him to be. Could we get him to Pittsburgh and just repeat a Courtland Sutton career year at some point in the next couple of years for Keon Coleman? I think that's kind of how he profiles.
It's incredibly difficult with him. First of all, he ran a really slow 40, and then he runs the fastest gauntlet at the combine.
Yeah, he's really good short burst.
Yeah, which probably indicates maybe his long speed's not there, but when you put the pads on, doesn't really matter. He returned punts.
Yeah.
And he returned punts really well.
Yeah.
A year ago, he outproduced a bludgeoning star in Jaden Reed at Michigan State with a bad quarterback.
Yeah.
Those are the positives. He definitely can't separate. It's definitely not there. At this point, it is not there in his career. He's also very young. So he has all the physical tools. He was number 2 on the freaks list that the Athletic puts out every year.
Yeah, he's 20% success rate or 20 percentile versus man coverage and 19th percentile against press man coverage. So again, really cannot separate.
He needs a trusting quarterback to throw him the ball because he'll get the ball. But my low end outcome for him is Devontae Parker or Devin Funchess. Big boys.
Or Kenny Galladay once he got to the Giants, which also don't send this man to the Giants.
Yes. No. My sneaky favorite landing spot for him would be the 49ers.
Yeah.
I know it's not exciting at first glance, and from fantasy, it's probably not exciting at all this year. But as Debo gets older, and I know we do this every year, that this guy is the Debo guy, but he can move so well with the ball. He can work a lot of the stuff they do with Debo. His change of direction is probably one of his better qualities that he could really work out there. And
he just needs to go to a coach that I trust. And I do trust Shanahan.
And the Steelers, I do also with the Russell Wilson fit of I trust my guy to get open. Teams I would absolutely hate. I think he would die in Miami.
Yeah.
I think he would not do well in Denver and the Raiders and the Patriots. I know they're getting picked on a lot here. I also don't think he would do well with the Bills or the Jaguars. This is probably the most landing spot dependent player in this draft.
at least among the top guys for sure.
Yes.
I think another guy who's like this is Corley, the Western Kentucky kid.
Yeah, Malachi Corley.
Deeper on the board. I think he's pretty. I mean, as you get deeper, everyone gets more landing spot dependent. But I think he is one of the most landing spot dependent guys who, like, there's things to like about him and his game. And
I will say
talk about Debo. Go ahead.
The fun thing about Corley, 44% of his catches were screens.
Yeah.
Like absurd amount of screen work.
He's the guy that's got the Debo tag
Yes.
heading into this draft for that reason. Okay. One of my personal favorites, just stylistically, is Ricky Purcell, who is our 10th receiver that we are going to go over. And like shades of Chris Olave kind of here with this guy, which again just maybe tells you I have a type at receiver. But I'll just say this: I like him a lot. He would definitely be ranked higher than 10th. You don't have to say what you think, but I would definitely have him ranked higher than 10th if I were doing receiver ranks on this. Like, he is such a strong separator. He's tied for the best success rate in the class on reception perception against man coverage. Pretty good against zone. Very explosive in the short areas, and he's a vertical threat. Like, some of the best hands in the class. And again, a little like Chris Olave, where the bigger cornerbacks can kind of have their way with him a little bit. Like, he can get bullied a little bit because of his size. Maybe people will just overlook him, kind of like Olave, and not in real life draft with Olave, but just like fantasy football value a little bit at times, because he doesn't look the part of a number one NFL wide receiver. But I do think this guy could be a 1 or a really good 1B wide receiver in the NFL. And the thing I like about him, kind of like with Zay Flowers last year, he played everywhere in college. He played every position. He proved he can basically do everything. Like, best fit, like, he can pretty much fit any receiver role that you want him to fit in the NFL to varying degrees of success. But he can get open all three levels, can play everywhere. Like, I really, really like the player. I think he's going to be a successful NFL player. My favorite fit for him, though, is actually reuniting with his college quarterback and basically just being a much superior Alec Pierce, who can do the deep threat stuff, but also do a lot more underneath and be a kind of invade on the Josh Downs territory and the Alec Pierce territory, kind of combine that into one player.
Yeah. Elite separator. PFF charted him as the third best separator in this class. He actually beat out Marvin Harrison in average separation. People forget he also had the collegiate catch of the year where he had a one-handed catch.
He legitimately has the best hands in this class.
Yes. My high-end comparison is a little wild. I'll go ahead and acknowledge that, but I went with Demaryius Thomas. Demaryius Thomas was a player who could play all three levels of the field, separated, and also for a large part of his career was severely underrated for his speed. Pearsall has all of those traits to do it. He is steadily climbing. I pulled this from mockdraftable.com, which just kind of surveys mock drafts. He went from pick 79 to pick 52 over the last month and a half. Got to get the cats out real quick. They got excited about the Pearsall talk as well. I understand it, Chloe. You just wanted to hear about Ricky Pearsall too.
Alex just got home and Chloe left the room, so I'm closing the door so we don't get a loud Chloe greeting from Alex on the podcast.
But yeah, like I was saying, he's climbed since Mock Draftable started charting in January from 79th in the NFL draft to 52nd. And he is their highest climber right now. Like, people are starting to recognize he's good. Florida just wasn't that good this year. And so he missed out on a lot of that.
It's really funny that, we talked all this crap on Florida and the offense, which was valid. And when we were scouting Anthony Richardson, and then the next year it's oh, actually one of his receivers I really love. So it's funny how that's worked out. But yeah, I don't really have a worst fit for him because of what I said as far as how he can fit anywhere. So just thinking purely situationally, I don't want to see him go to places that are loaded, Seattle, San Francisco, Tampa Bay. Just put him somewhere where he's going to have a quick opportunity, and I think he's going to produce.
I actually had the Jets
as a worst fit.
Yeah, I think he doesn't get enough field time this year because Aaron Rodgers retires at the end of the year. they keep Nathaniel Hackett for another year, and we're 2 years away from like an actual productive season because of bad quarterback play and then because of bad offensive coaching. Again, I understand that I'm ragging on the Jets pretty frequently here. I do not trust the process at all in New York, just for what it's worth.
Yeah. All right. Let's do tight ends quickly to close out the show. We can spend a little bit longer on the first guy. Obviously, everybody knows Brock Bowers, number one tight end prospect, number one guy on this list. And without revealing exactly what we think rankings wise, let's just say you're playing in a tight end premium league where it's like, 1.5 per reception for tight ends.
No super flex.
No super flex. So let's just compare him to the top 3 receivers if it's tight end premium. Would you take him over any of the 3 receivers in that type of scoring format?
It's so mixy. It depends where he lands. But like maybe it's tough.
I think I'm no, but the fact that like we have to think about it and he's right there. I just want to give people kind of a point of reference for the quality of prospect that this is in Brock Bowers, because he's another guy who's been kind of tagged as a generational prospect. And now I do think the shine has kind of come off a little bit on that. I don't know if it's because people are looking at him more in pads and realizing like, he's not that big, but like, I don't know. Like, I really don't care how big he is. Like, special athlete for his size. I don't care that he didn't test the combine. You can see that if you watch him play at all at Georgia. Crazy acceleration. When he really gets going, he looks like George Kittle after the catch. He's obviously not as big, but I mean, he is just a freak of nature athlete. He will not do this in the NFL probably, but in college, he had almost 200 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns and was running legit jet sweeps and was a legit jet sweep threat. He may get a couple of those in the NFL, but again, just to tell you a little bit of the kind of athlete we're talking about here, he also like proved to be a freak of nature recovery wise too. He missed 2 games with tightrope ankle surgery. That's a 4 to 6 week injury. So also, if anyone tries to hold anything at the end of the season last year against him, keep in mind he was playing 2 weeks after tightrope ankle surgery, which is a 4 to 6 week injury. Like, I don't want to say he's going to be and I especially hate invoking Travis Kelce's name, but like, if you tell me he's a little bit of a Kittle Kelsey hybrid, otherwise maybe known as like a Sam Laporta, I think like you can kind of see all of those 3 players in Bowers and how he plays.
Yeah. I think if he were listed as a wide receiver, we would be having a big 4 conversation pretty consistently. Fun fact, until his 1,000-yard season in 2021, the Georgia Bulldogs had not had a 1,000-yard receiver since 1992. So if you include him in
that's even AJ Green, who we just talked about.
Yes, it is an absurd stat. So that alone should give you an idea about Brock Bowers' talent level. He also has the highest yards after the catch of any tight end since 1982.
Yeah, and
the guy that I have listed here is AJ Bernard. I don't know who that is.
Go watch highlights from the 2022 SEC championship game against Alabama if you want to see what this guy is like after the catch.
Yeah. He was also keeping like quality NFL talent out of the receiving game. Like A.D. Mitchell his rookie season, Jermaine Burton, even Ladd McConkey. Like
his backup tight end got drafted to be a Steelers offensive tackle last year.
Darnell Wash. Yeah.
Yep.
It's absurd. My bad landing spots for him, I think the Raiders are bad. I think the Broncos are bad. Any coach that brings him in and is like, yeah, you're also going to block for us, I think that's a stupid call.
Yeah. Don't do that.
Yeah. The Colts would be a good fit. I feel iffy on the Saints. I don't know how to feel about the Saints yet. I haven't got a full come around to that one. I feel like he's in that like mid-teens range in a lot of drafts, but 9 to the Bears would be superb to me. I think he could do really good things there, and they do need a better tight end than Cole Kmet. IMO.
I wish the Texans hadn't like softly committed to whatever the very average tight ends
Dalton
that get.
Schultz.
Yeah, Dalton Schultz. Because like if you just take him, he's better than Dalton Schultz. But if you just act like the Texans don't have any tight end, then you're like, oh, you can put this guy with that group. That would be a lot of fun. I like the Colts fit too. Tampa Bay is another one where it's like Kate Otton's their tight end. They have two awesome receivers. Just throw this guy out there and let him work with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. That would be a lot of fun too. And yeah, as far as worst fits, I don't really know about team specific because like the obvious ones, like the 49ers aren't drafting him, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are teams that teams that want their tight ends to be blockers but don't have like I don't know anyone that's gonna force them into a not being out wide all the time basically.
I haven't seen him go this high, so I doubt it's a likely scenario unless they trade back. But the Giants would be pretty terrible.
The Chargers seem bad because of what it seems like Harbaugh wants to do too.
Yes, that, and as much as I love him, being a tight end and trying to work in as receiver without receivers is drastically more difficult.
Kyle Pitts.
Kyle Pitts. So those two situations would scare me a bit. I could probably talk myself into the Chargers. I probably couldn't talk myself into the New York Giants.
Yeah, you can talk yourself into the Chargers because of the quarterback, obviously. But then, like I said, it gets a little scary because you have the combination of really no receivers. Like as of right now, it is Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer and who else exactly? And then
Simi Feheko.
And then we don't know this is going to be the case, but it feels like Harbaugh wants to run the ball. It feels like that. Will it be to the extreme of people's worst fears? Probably not because they have Justin Herbert. But like I'd be a little afraid of that. With
the last wild one I'll give you, the Vikings do not get a trade up. He's there at 11. He goes to an offense with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and just eats. I think that would be my fun scenario to play out.
So we're just deleting poor injured TJ Hawkinson from existence.
I forgot TJ Hawkinson was there. We are. Yeah. He gets traded back to the Lions. Sam Laporta and him. Last thing I wanted to ask you, last couple of years, Sam Laporta, Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid, Brock Bowers. How do you rate those four?
Well, it's funny because are you talking like just as prospects? I remove anything they've done in the NFL.
Let's just say you're doing dynasty rankings today.
Oh, dynasty rankings today. I think it would be Laporta 1, Bowers 2. I guess Kincaid 3 and Pitts 4. Part of that might be just the stink of Kyle Pitts. Part of that is because Kincaid has Josh Allen. If I were going just as prospects, I think Bowers is number 1.
Yeah, I think I agree mostly with those rankings. We didn't mention Trey McBride, but I think we both would have him at 5.
Yeah, he's a little fool's gold.
But we do have a fun little tight end renaissance going on right now. I can't wait until August when me and Evan are telling you don't draft a guy in the 50s and 60s, and you do, and then that one doesn't work out because it always happens every year.
Yeah. I love Dalton Kincaid. Don't draft him to be your tight end 4. That'll probably be that advice will probably hold true. And
Evan Ingram is going in the 14th round.
Okay, we've got 4 tight ends. Let's get out of here in the next 10 minutes on these guys. Jatavion Sanders out of Texas. This is a David Njoku type of guy, like good athlete, kind of a raw game, has the size, has the quickness. He can win on mismatches, like a little Evan Ingramish as well, who you just mentioned. Like his athletic ability is going to be what gets him on the field early, if anything. But I also think this is a guy where you probably need patience. It took Njoku some time to earn consistent trust of his coaches and his quarterbacks. And yeah, like he has the speed, has the acceleration, can cause those mismatch problems. But I do think he is a little rough around the edges right now.
Yeah. He was mocked at the end of the first round to start this. And then as more film came out, more testing came out, he's fallen into the second round. I think he's like 50.5.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I'd have him as my tight end 2.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think someone else is the tight end 2 in this class. The other thing with Jatavion Sanders is he's not as He's big looking. He did not test well athletically, which athletic testing does matter for tight ends unless your name is Brock Bowers. At Hayden Winks on that one. I mean, I think he could end up being a fine NFL tight end. David Njoku is a high end comp for him. I didn't write a comp down for him, but like just scanning the NFL, I mean, I feel like he could be like 2 degrees worse than Darren Waller. And with all these guys, just so everybody's clear, there is a Grand Canyon size gap between them. And like, these are 3rd round dynasty picks we're talking about at this point, and Brock Bowers is a top 5 dynasty pick. There's a big canyon between these guys.
Yep. Agreed for sure. All right. Next guy, Ben Sanat out of K-State. I like this guy. I like this guy a lot. He is a former walk-on, and it's just like the most K-State thing ever to be a former walk-on and going to be probably a pretty good NFL player. Jordy Nelson, stand up. Get this man to the Chiefs. That's all I have to say about kind of the player type. He is pretty fluid for his size, had a lot of big plays at K-State, and it's so funny if you just read about him and didn't watch him, you'd be very confused because he had all of these huge plays, but he won the Loman Trophy as the nation's top fullback last year. And that is because he lined up in the backfield a ton, was an H-back, is a great lead blocker, but also he is a really good slot vertical weapon. And I just think that would be such a fun toy for Andy Reid as the tight end 2 behind Travis Kelce.
New Blake Bell, QB sneak 2 right there at the fullback position. Fun fact about him. So he has really good contact balance, probably the 2nd best of this draft class. It's really hard to hit him off his runs. And I think part of that, pulling that tidbit together from Matt Waldman and then reading the beast from Dane Brugler. Ben Sinnott did not play football until his senior year of high school. Before that, he was a power forward for his hockey's varsity team, which explains why he has such good contact balance. I'm always a fan of like multi-sport athletes, some of these skill positions, because they bring things that you don't often get. Big fan of him. 2nd in the class in yards per route run. Incredible snow game with Kansas State last year. He is just a really fun player. I think it's pretty clear. We could probably say this. He is both of our tight end 2s, it sounds like, in this class.
Yeah, I don't think we hit that one too well.
Panthers also. I would love him to end up in the Panthers.
Yeah, I agree with you there. He's a very fun player who I think can do a lot of different things. Now, I will say, like, I saw there were some George Kittle hyperboles being thrown around today on Twitter. Not like quite there with that necessarily, but with him, I think draft capital is probably going to be a pretty big deal as far as how he's valued in rookie drafts, because he is a guy who he could maybe get day 2 compensation, but probably more likely day 3. We'll see where in day 3, and then obviously where he goes, and how, like, what that tight end room looks like that he goes to.
Fun teams could be the Cowboys, could be the Bengals. I think he could overtake Mike Gesicki pretty quickly. Bad teams, the Jaguars, him and Evan Ingram would be a lot of overlap. Not a lot of fun there. Obviously, like Detroit, if they do something stupid, or the Niners would be bad. And then Raiders, him and Michael Mayer. Michael Mayer is probably a worse player in my opinion, but there would be a lot of overlap between those two. And the tight end learning curve in the NFL is probably the steepest learning curve of any skill position.
Yep. All right. Theo Johnson. This guy is the physical specimen of this class. 6'6", 259. He is quite fast as well. The comp that he gets from Matt Waldman is Albert O. So that tells you, like, the athletic profile. He hopefully doesn't turn out to be quite the tease that Albert O was, but it's very possible. What is a little bit scary about him, and I don't get too tied up in college production, but what's a little bit scary, just looking at his stats, he does not have 1,000 total yards in his college career, and that was basically 3 full seasons. Never got to 400 yards in a season. Like, I don't know. And then the other thing on him is his athletic ability doesn't show up on the field quite like he tested. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. Seems like the footwork maybe needs to get a little bit better. But again, he has the raw tools to where if you give this guy a couple years and he is able to figure out the footwork, how to get open better against man coverage, how to do some of those little things, like he could.
Are you saying if he figures out how to play football? Because it kind of sounds like that.
I mean, Alberto. Like if Alberto learns how to play football, he can still
You
do
watch
the
out.
thing.
Year 5 breakout incoming. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something in the water that Penn State does. They always test really well athletically. I have a feeling their strength and conditioning program really handles NFL combine testing in the offseason. 34th percentile in yards per route run among tight ends, which is really, really bad for anybody wondering. Counterpoint to everything we're saying, Drew Allar sucks.
Yeah.
Penn State's quarterback is terrible. And that could mean a lot of his production is hidden because his quarterback simply is just not a good quarterback.
Yep.
So positives there, likely a day 3-4 pick. Unlike what I said earlier, I think a team like the Jaguars would be a good fit where he gets to develop under a guy who has good footwork, who has good pass catching ability, to have Ingram, or somewhere where there's a tight end that will be aging out and he gets some time to learn the position well. This is a rookie, like probably a 3rd, 4th round pick in your rookie drafts, and a guy who is a stash and wait this season.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Cade Stover, last guy out of Ohio State. I mean, Hunter Henry is the comp that I've seen. I like that comp. Gives you an idea of the type of player he is. Not a great blocker, very skilled, very athletic pass catcher, good use of hands on targets, makes a lot of tough catches, and just a lot of his value is going to be his landing spot. How hard is that path for him getting on the field? Like you talk about Sanat being a former hockey player. This guy is a former linebacker turned tight end. So if that tells you a little bit about the type of toughness that he plays with over the middle of the field, like this guy is a very tough player. He is skilled. And, like I mentioned this with Bowers, but to a lesser extent with Stover, would love to see him in a place like Tampa where it's like he to me profiles more as a immediate impact type of guy. I want to see him go to a Tampa, to a Carolina, like to a place where I can see him on the field quickly, because I do think he could be like in the tight end streaming conversation by week 10 if the situation is right.
He's a 4-year starter at Ohio State. He is just a really solid player. Like he understands what he needs to do, and he does a really good job in coverage against linebackers. Unlike Theo Johnson, I agree with you. Like he's an immediate impact starter. I think similar to like Hayden Hurst and going back, Anthony Ferguson back with the Tennessee Titans, like guys who are going to have that one season where like, oh wow, there's something here.
Yeah,
but he will make himself a player in the NFL who consistently is on a roster, who consistently could be the top tight end on that roster, and will produce you like reliable streaming outcomes on your roster. I think he's a sure thing to be an effective tight end in the NFL, but sometimes effective is like 500 to 750 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like it's not anything to send home about, but he does everything fundamentally sound. He just doesn't have anything special about him.
Yep. Agreed. All right, Dalton, are we good? We good to get out of here? Got through those tight ends?
We're good. I just want to give a quick shout out to my boy, Eric All. I'm sorry for all those injuries. You could have been tight end too, my brother.
And that is going to do it for episode 138 of the Half Point Per Podcast. We will be live during the NFL draft next week. And we actually have, I think, a pretty fun show, a different show planned next week for that. We'll put more details on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, throughout the week. Half Point Per Pod on those platforms. And we will be streaming to our YouTube channel. Just search Half Point Per Podcast on YouTube to find us. The show is available anywhere you find podcasts. Thank you all so much again for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.